The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Eastern Metropolitan Conservatory's main hall, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. It was just past 9, and students hurried through the corridors, instrument cases bumping against their legs as they rushed to their first classes of the day. The building itself seemed to hum with music, distant scales from the practice rooms, a cello sonata echoing from somewhere upstairs, and the nervous energy of young musicians at one of the country's most competitive music schools. Mei Lin stood at the entrance to room 307, clutching her worn backpack strap with one hand while the other held a crumpled schedule. She tucked a strand of black hair behind her ear and took a deep breath. The advanced piano seminar was about to begin, and despite having played since she could reach the keys, her heart thumped wildly against her ribs. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "Just get through today." The classroom was arranged like a small concert hall with rows of seats facing a magnificent grand piano at the center. Most of the chairs were already filled with students dressed in expensive-looking clothes, many of them chatting in small groups. A few glanced her way as she entered, their eyes quickly taking in her simple jeans and faded blue sweater before returning to their conversations. May slipped into an empty seat in the back row, making herself as small as possible. She was used to being invisible. It had been her survival strategy growing up in a small town where her family never quite fit in. But today, invisibility felt like a blessing. She just needed to observe and get the lay of the land before drawing any attention to herself. The chatter in the room died instantly when the door swung open with a dramatic flourish. Professor Richard Harlow strode in, his tall figure commanding attention without effort. His silver hair was swept back from a high forehead, and his piercing blue eyes surveyed the room with the sharpness of someone used to spotting every flaw in a performance. Behind him followed two other teachers, a middle-aged woman with a severe bun and a younger man whose friendly face seemed out of place next to Harlow's stern demeanor. "Welcome to Advanced Piano Performance," Harlow announced without preamble. His voice was as precise as his appearance, each word delivered with the same crispness a pianist might give to staccato notes. "For those who haven't had the privilege of studying with me before, I am Professor Harlow. This is Professor Chen," he nodded toward the woman, "and Dr. Bryant toward the younger man. Let me be clear from the outset," he continued, pacing slowly in front of the piano. "Half of you will not complete this course. It is not because I enjoy failing students, though I do find a certain satisfaction in maintaining standards, but because half of you simply do not belong at this level." A tense silence fell over the room. May watched as several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One boy near the front seemed to be holding his breath. "We will begin with introductions," Harlow said. "Name, background, and most challenging piece mastered to date. You," he pointed to a girl in the front row. "Start." One by one, the students introduced themselves. They came from prestigious preparatory schools, had won youth competitions, studied with famous teachers. Their challenging pieces included Chopin's ballads, Liszt's Hungarian rhapsodies, and Beethoven's later sonatas, all impressive accomplishments for musicians their age. With each introduction, May's stomach tightened further. Her own story was nothing like theirs. No famous teachers until the scholarship. No fancy competitions. Just endless hours of practice on out-of-tune pianos in strangers' homes while her father worked, learning by ear and instinct until the old Russian teacher had found her and changed everything. The introductions moved closer to her row, and May rehearsed her simple explanation in her head. But before it reached her, Professor Harlow held up his hand to stop the process. "That's enough," he said. "I see we have our usual mix of adequately prepared students and hopelessly optimistic dreamers." His gaze swept across the room, lingering briefly on May's corner before moving on. "This term we will focus on the Russian Romantics, Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, Scriabin. Their work requires not just technical skill but emotional maturity. Many of you," his tone suggested he meant most, "will find yourselves woefully unprepared." Professor Chen stepped forward, distributing syllabus packets with a tight-lipped efficiency. When she reached May, she paused, frowning slightly. "I don't believe I recognize you," she said, her voice carrying in the quiet room. "Are you registered for this class?" Every head turned toward May, who felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Yes," she said softly, pulling out her registration confirmation. "I'm Mei Lin. I transferred this semester." Professor Harlow's eyebrows shot up. "Ah, yes. The scholarship student from... He made a vague gesture with his hand. Somewhere out west. Pine Ridge, May supplied, her voice barely audible. Indeed. His tone made the small town sound like a foreign country. And you believe you're prepared for this level of instruction? The question hung in the air like a challenge. May nodded, not trusting her voice. Professor Harlow exchanged a look with Professor Chen, a look May had seen countless times before. It was the look adults gave when they had already decided someone didn't belong. Well then, Harlow said, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Perhaps you'd care to demonstrate your readiness? The room fell completely silent. This wasn't part of the normal procedure. Even May could tell that much from the surprised faces of the other students. Professor Bryant frowned slightly, looking as if he might object but said nothing. Come now, Harlow continued, gesturing toward the gleaming grand piano. Since you've chosen to join our elite program mid-semester, perhaps you could demonstrate what qualifies you to be here. May's legs felt like lead as she slowly stood up. The distance to the piano seemed to stretch out endlessly before her. She could feel every eye in the room on her back, could almost hear the collective judgment. The scholarship student, the outsider, the girl in the cheap clothes who didn't belong. Nothing too simple, of course, Harlow said as she made her way to the piano bench. He tapped his finger against his chin, pretending to consider. I know. Since we're focusing on the Russian composers this term, why not give us a taste of Rachmaninoff? Piano Concerto No. 3, first movement. I assume you're familiar with it? A few gasps escaped from the students, even to those who hadn't played it. Rachmaninoff's third was known as a mountain few could climb, a piece so notoriously difficult that many professional pianists avoided it entirely. The message was clear. Harlow wasn't just testing May. He was setting her up to fail spectacularly. Professor Bryant stepped forward. Richard, that's hardly... No, it's perfectly fair, Harlow cut him off. If Ms. Lin is qualified for this class, she should be at least passingly familiar with one of the cornerstones of the piano repertoire. Isn't that right, Ms. Lin? All eyes turned to May, who stood frozen beside the piano. She should have felt terrified, and part of her was, but something else was rising within her. A quiet determination that had carried her through every obstacle life had thrown her way. She thought of her father, whose rough hands had never touched a keyboard, but who had sacrificed everything to nurture her talent. She thought of her elderly Russian teacher, who had believed in her when no one else did, who had pushed her beyond what she thought possible during those 5 years of intensive training. Yes, she said quietly, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. I know the piece. Harlow's smile faltered slightly as if he had expected her to back down. The entire first movement? Without the orchestra, of course. May nodded and took her place on the bench, adjusting it with deliberate movements to buy herself a few seconds to calm her racing heart. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself the way her teacher had taught her. The room around her faded away, the judgmental professors, the watching students, even her own doubts. In that moment, there was only May and the piano, just as there had been countless times before in empty houses where she practiced while her father tuned. In her teacher's dusty studio with its cracked ceiling and magical acoustics. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling their cool, familiar weight beneath her fingers. The opening theme of Rachmaninoff's third concerto floated in her mind, those deceptively simple notes that would soon give way to some of the most challenging passages ever written for the piano. Professor Harlow crossed his arms, waiting for the inevitable stumble. The proof that this unremarkable girl from nowhere had no place among his select students. A few of the students leaned forward, curious despite themselves to see how quickly she would crash and burn. May took one final breath and began to play. The first notes floated through the air like a gentle question, simple, unassuming, almost shy, just like May herself. But those who knew Rachmaninoff's third understood that this quiet beginning was merely the calm before the storm. Professor Harlow's smug expression froze on his face as May's fingers moved across the keys with unexpected confidence. The melody unfolded with perfect clarity, each phrase beautifully shaped. When the tempo increased and the piece grew more complex, May didn't falter. Her small hand stretched impossibly across the keys, capturing the rich harmonies that made Rachmaninoff's music so distinctive. A few students exchanged glances of surprise. One boy in the front row put down his phone, suddenly paying full attention. Professor Chen's eyebrows rose slightly, while Dr. Bryant leaned forward in his chair, a smile beginning to form on his face. As May played, her mind drifted back to where it all began. Not in some prestigious music academy, but in a tiny apartment above Wong's hardware store in Pine Ridge. She was 5 years old, watching her father get ready for work. Li Wei-lin was a piano tuner, one of the few in their rural area, traveling from home to care for instruments that families often couldn't afford to replace. "Can I come today, Baba?" little May had asked, already knowing the answer would be yes. Her father never refused these requests, even though bringing a child to work wasn't always convenient. Her mother had passed away when May was just 2, and with no relatives nearby, May often accompanied her father on his rounds. "Of course, little cricket," he'd answered, packing his tuning tools into their worn leather case. "But remember the rules. Sit quietly, touch nothing without permission. Stay out of the way," May had recited, having heard these instructions countless times before. Those early days formed the foundation of her musical life. While her father worked, adjusting hammers and tightening pins, May would watch, fascinated by how he could make the same note sound completely different with the tiniest adjustments. When clients weren't home or were busy in another room, he would sometimes let her press the keys after he finished a section, explaining in whispers how the instrument worked. "The piano is alive," he would tell her. "It breathes, it speaks, it sings. You must listen to what it wants to say." May's hands moved effortlessly into the concerto's first major technical challenge, a series of rapidly ascending patterns that required perfect coordination between both hands. In room 307, several students sat up straighter, their expressions changing from casual interest to genuine surprise. Her thoughts continued to flow back through time. She was 7 now, sitting in the corner of Mrs. Thornton's sunroom while her father tuned the elderly woman's baby grand, a beautiful instrument largely forgotten since Mrs. Thornton's arthritis had worsened. "Would you like to try it?" Mrs. Thornton had asked May after her father finished, noticing how the child's eyes never left the keyboard. That was the first time May had played on a properly tuned grand piano, picking out a simple melody she'd heard on the radio. Mrs. Thornton had been so delighted that she'd invited them back the following week, not for tuning, but for May to play. "Your daughter has a gift," she'd told May's father. "She should have lessons." But lessons cost money they didn't have, and in Pine Ridge, classically trained piano teachers were as rare as snow in summer. Instead, May's education came piecemeal, from kind clients who let her practice on their instruments, from worn books found at library sales, from recordings she listened to with fierce concentration, trying to unlock their secrets. In the classroom, May reached the first cadenza of the concerto, where the solo pianist typically shows their technical prowess. Her small hands moved with astonishing speed and precision, capturing the thunderous power and delicacy that the passage demanded. Professor Harlow's arms slowly uncrossed, his confident smirk replaced by an expression of grudging interest. By the time May turned 12, she had developed her own unusual practice method. After school, she would accompany her father on jobs, help him where she could, and then, if the clients weren't home, she would play their pianos, sometimes for hours, developing her technique through trial and error, guided only by her ear and instinct. At the homes of music teachers or serious musicians, she would secretly examine their sheet music, memorizing as much as she could before having to leave. Then she would practice on tabletops at home, her fingers dancing silently across the fake wood laminate, the music playing in her head. Her father knew of these secret practice sessions but pretended not to. It was technically wrong, using other people's pianos without permission, but he couldn't bear to stop her, not when music was so clearly the center of his daughter's world, the one thing that made her eyes light up with joy. In the conservatory classroom, May's performance gathered momentum. The piece grew more demanding, with quick hand crossings and enormous chords that required precise balance to maintain the melody. A few professors from neighboring classrooms had paused outside the door, drawn by the unexpected sound of virtuoso playing from what should have been an introductory session. May's mind continued its journey backward. She was 16 now, and her secret playing was no longer so secret. Clients had begun to request that she come along with her father, offering to pay extra if she would play for them after the tuning was complete. Some even invited others to listen, creating impromptu recitals in living rooms across the county. It was at one of these informal gatherings that fate stepped in. Anton Petrov, a touring concert pianist giving a recital at the community college. The next town over, had been invited to a dinner where May was playing. She hadn't known who he was, just another guest in nice clothes, and had played without her usual nervousness, losing herself in a Chopin nocturne. Afterward, he had approached her father, speaking with the slight accent that hinted at his Russian heritage. "Your daughter plays with something that cannot be taught," he had said. "She has the technique of someone with years of formal training, yet I can hear that she is largely self-taught. It's quite remarkable." Then he had made an offer that changed everything. "My teacher, the man who trained me, is retired now. He lives not far from here in seclusion. He rarely accepts students anymore, but for someone with your daughter's natural gifts, he might make an exception." 3 days later, May had found herself in a small house on the outskirts of a neighboring town, playing for a stern-faced old man with bushy white eyebrows and gnarled hands that could no longer manage the demanding pieces he had once performed around the world. Alexei Volkov had been a piano prodigy in the Soviet Union before defecting to the West in the 1970s. After a successful career, he had withdrawn from public life, disillusioned with what he called the circus of the concert world. "She plays like a wild animal," he had told Petrov in May's presence, as if she couldn't hear. "No discipline, no proper technique, but so much raw talent." He had turned to May's father. "I will teach her. 3 hours every day after school. No payment required, but absolute commitment demanded. If she misses even one lesson without dying first, I will stop teaching her." For the next 5 years, May had lived 2 lives. Normal high school student by day, dedicated piano student by late afternoon and evening. Volkov was demanding to the point of cruelty sometimes, making her repeat passages hundreds of times, criticizing every imperfection, occasionally even shouting when she failed to capture the emotion he wanted. But he was also capable of rare moments of encouragement that meant more because they were so seldom given. "Again," he would say after she played something well. "But this time, make me believe that your heart is breaking." Or, "Again, but now, make me feel like I am falling in love for the first time." Under his guidance, May's natural talent had been forged into genuine artistry. Technique was drilled into her fingers until it became second nature, leaving her mind free to focus on interpretation. After she graduated high school, the lessons expanded to full days, 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours of practice, with Volkov pushing her far beyond what she thought possible. "You must play so well that they cannot ignore you," he would tell her when she collapsed in exhaustion. "In this world, people like us, without money, without connections, must be twice as good to get half as far." When Volkov suffered a stroke, the previous year, his final act before being taken to the hospital had been to contact his old connections at the Eastern Metropolitan Conservatory, calling in favors to secure May an audition. The scholarship that followed was his last gift to her. In room 307, the other students were now watching May with undisguised amazement. Professor Chen had taken out a notepad and was writing rapidly. Dr. Bryant was smiling openly, while Professor Harlow's face had transformed entirely, the contempt replaced by genuine attention as May approached the movement's powerful climax. Her fingers flew across the keys with the speed and precision that only thousands of hours of practice could produce. The complex counterpoint sang clearly, each voice distinct, yet part of the greater whole. When she reached the thundering chords, near the end of the movement, the piano seemed almost to lift off the ground, filling the room with sound that belied May's small stature. As the final notes resonated through the classroom, May slowly returned to the present moment, suddenly aware of the absolute silence that had fallen over the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Professor Harlow stood motionless, his hand frozen in midair as if he had been about to turn a page that no longer existed. Then from the doorway where a small crowd had gathered, someone began to applaud. The applause started with one person but quickly spread throughout the room. Students who moments ago had looked at May with dismissal or pity now stared in open amazement. A few had already pulled out their phones, recording the unexpected moment. Professor Bryant was clapping enthusiastically, his face lit up with genuine delight. Even Professor Chen had set aside her notepad to join in the appreciation, though her expression remained carefully measured. Only Professor Harlow stood motionless, his face a complex mix of emotions that May couldn't quite read. Surprise was certainly there, along with something that might have been embarrassment. But there was also a flicker of something else, a spark of interest, perhaps even excitement, quickly hidden behind his professional mask. May sat frozen at the piano, her hands still hovering above the keys. The transition from being deep inside the music to suddenly facing a room full of applauding people left her disoriented. This wasn't how she had expected her first day to go. She hadn't meant to draw this much attention to herself. A tall woman with silver-streaked black hair appeared at the doorway, making her way through the small crowd that had gathered there. The other professors straightened slightly at her arrival, and May guessed this must be someone important. The woman moved with quiet authority, her eyes fixed on May with an intensity that made the young pianist want to shrink back into the piano. "Well," the woman said, when the applause finally died down, "I was on my way to a budget meeting when I heard Rachmaninoff being played rather convincingly down the hall." She turned to Professor Harlow. "Richard, I don't recall seeing the student at our spring auditions." Harlow cleared his throat. "Dr. Wei, this is Mei Lin. She's a new transfer on scholarship. She just demonstrated her familiarity with the Rachmaninoff third." Dr. Wei raised an eyebrow. "Indeed." She turned back to May. "Ms. Lin, that was remarkably assured playing for someone your age. The technical aspects were impressive, of course, but what caught my attention was your phrasing in the second development section. You've clearly spent time with this piece." May nodded, not sure what to say. Her throat felt tight. Unused to receiving praise from someone so clearly important. "Who did you study with before coming here?" Dr. Wei asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Alexei Volkov," May said softly. The effect of the name on the room was immediate. Dr. Wei's eyes widened slightly. Professor Chen made a small sound of surprise. Even Harlow seemed genuinely startled. "Alexei Volkov," Dr. Wei repeated. "The Alexei Volkov who disappeared from the concert circuit 15 years ago? You're saying you studied with him?" May nodded again, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her. She hadn't meant to name-drop her teacher. It had just been an honest answer to a direct question. "That's..." Dr. Wei paused, seemingly at a loss for words. "Unexpected." Volkov was known for refusing students. After his retirement, the rumor was that he had stopped teaching entirely. "He did, mostly," May said, finding her voice. "I was an exception." Dr. Wei studied her with new interest. "Well, Ms. Lin, exception seems to be an appropriate word for you in several respects." She turned to Harlow. "I think we found this year's wild card, Richard. Make sure Ms. Lin gets all the resources she needs." With that, she nodded to the room and departed as quickly as she had arrived. The atmosphere in the classroom had shifted completely. Students who had ignored May earlier now looked at her with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and, from a few, the first stirrings of rivalry. Professor Harlow appeared to be reassessing everything about his initial judgment. "Well," he said finally, "that was illuminating. Ms. Lin, you may return to your seat." May stood up from the piano bench, her legs trembling slightly. The walk back to her chair felt different now. No longer the path of an outsider, but that of someone who had just dramatically altered the dynamic of the room. As she passed the front row, several students nodded at her with newfound respect. One girl with curly red hair whispered, "That was amazing," as May walked by. Back in her seat, May tried to process what had just happened. She had only wanted to blend in, to quietly prove herself over time. Instead, she had been thrust into the spotlight on day one. Volkov would have approved. He always said that fear of attention was a luxury talented musicians couldn't afford, but the thought didn't make her any more comfortable. "Professor," Harlow had regained his composure and was now outlining the semester's curriculum as if the extraordinary interlude had never happened. But May noticed that his gaze frequently returned to her, assessing and recalculating. The other students, too, kept glancing her way when they thought she wouldn't notice. After class, May gathered her things quickly, hoping to slip away before anyone could question her. But as she neared the door, the girl with curly red hair stepped into her path. "Hi," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Zoe. That was seriously incredible. I've been working on the Rach third for 8 months and still can't get through the first movement without my hands cramping." "Thanks," May replied, shaking the offered hand. "I'm May." "Oh, we all know who you are now," Zoe laughed, but there was no malice in it. "Listen, a bunch of us usually grab coffee after Harlow's class, sort of a therapeutic necessity. Want to join? I promise no one will make you play any more Rachmaninoff." Before May could answer, 2 more students joined them. A tall boy with glasses and a girl with a neat black bob. "Definitely come," said the boy, introducing himself as Thomas. "You've just survived your first Harlow hazing with more style than anyone in conservatory history. That deserves celebration. And an explanation," added the girl with the bob, who introduced herself as Lily. "How did you end up studying with the mysterious Volkov? The man's practically a legend." May hesitated. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, especially from peers who clearly came from musical backgrounds so different from her own, but something in their genuine interest made her nod. "Okay," she said. "Coffee sounds nice." As they left the building together, May noticed Professor Harlow watching from the classroom door, his expression thoughtful. He nodded slightly when their eyes met, an acknowledgement that seemed both professional and slightly apologetic. The campus coffee shop was busy, but not crowded. May followed her new acquaintances to a corner table after ordering a simple black coffee, the cheapest item on the menu. As they settled in, she became aware of glances from other students, some of whom had clearly already heard about what happened in room 307. "So the rumor mill is already working," Thomas observed, noticing her discomfort. "By dinner they'll be saying you're Volkov's secret granddaughter or something equally dramatic." "Better set the record straight before the stories get too wild," Zoe suggested, looking at May with friendly curiosity. So May told them, not everything, but the broad outlines. About her father, the piano tuner, about learning by playing clients' pianos, about Volkov discovering her through his former student and taking her on despite his reclusive nature. "Wait," Lily interrupted. "You mean you had almost no formal training until you were 16? And then just 5 years with Volkov?" May nodded, suddenly self-conscious. Thomas shook his head. "I've been taking lessons since I was 4. My parents spent a fortune on teachers, summer programs, competitions. Most of us have," Zoe agreed. "And none of us play like you do." There was no resentment in her voice, just wonder, but May still felt the weight of being different. "Volkov worked me very hard," she said quietly. 6 to 8 hours every day after I finished high school. 12 hours on weekends. He said I had to make up for lost time. The others exchanged glances. "That explains the technique," Lily said, "but not the musicality. That's either there or it isn't." Their conversation was interrupted when a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 60s approached their table. His salt and pepper hair was cut short and he wore a tweed jacket that had seen better days. "Ms. Lin," he said with a gentle smile, "I hope I'm not interrupting. I'm Professor William Kwan, head of the piano faculty." May scrambled to her feet, nearly knocking over her coffee. "Professor Kwan!" "No, you're not interrupting at all." Her new friends looked suitably impressed. William Kwan was one of the conservatory's most respected teachers, known for both his performing career and for mentoring some of the country's top pianists. "I just came from a rather animated conversation with Eleanor Way, our dean, whom you met earlier, and Richard Harlow. Your performance this morning has caused quite a stir." His eyes twinkled. "It's not often that Richard is rendered speechless. I consider that an achievement in itself." May blushed, unsure how to respond. "I knew Alexei Volkov many years ago," Professor Kwan continued. "We were at the Moscow competition together in 1986, back when the Soviet Union still existed. He was brilliant but difficult, much like Rachmaninoff himself, ironically. When he disappeared from public life, many of us wondered what became of him." "How is he?"
"He had a stroke last year," May said quietly.
"It's why I'm here." He arranged my audition before she trailed off, the memory still painful. "He can't play anymore, can barely speak, but his mind is still sharp." Professor Kwan's face softened with genuine sadness. "I'm very sorry to hear that. The music world lost a great artist when he withdrew, even before his illness. He paused, then continued in a lighter tone. But it seems he found a worthy successor to carry on his legacy. Now May's blush deepened. I wouldn't say that. I'm still learning. As are we all, Professor Kwan replied. But some learn faster than others. He glanced at the small group. I won't keep you from your friends, Ms. Lin. I just wanted to introduce myself and tell you that my door is always open if you need anything. Alexei was never one for half measures. I imagine your training with him was intense. If you ever want to discuss his methods or approach certain pieces differently, I'm here. With that, he nodded politely to the group and departed, leaving May feeling as if she'd been through an emotional whirlwind. First, the humiliation of Harlow's challenge, then the unexpected success of her performance. And now this warm welcome from one of the school's most respected figures. Okay, Thomas said when Professor Kwan was out of earshot. That settles it. You're officially conservatory royalty now. Don't be ridiculous, May protested, but she couldn't help smiling a little. He's right, Zoe agreed. Kwan doesn't just approach students in coffee shops. Most people wait months for a meeting with him. As their conversation continued, May felt something unfamiliar blooming inside her. A tentative sense of belonging. For most of her life, her talent had made her an outsider. Someone who didn't quite fit anywhere. Today, for the first time, it seemed like it might actually be a bridge to connection instead. The afternoon light streamed through the coffee shop windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Outside, other students hurried between classes, unaware of how much had changed for the quiet new girl from Pine Ridge. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for now, sitting among her first-ever musical peers, May allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found her place. The next morning, May woke before her alarm. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of her dormitory room, casting a warm glow across the small space. For a moment, she lay still, trying to convince herself that yesterday had actually happened. It felt like a dream, the kind that seems so real you're not quite sure where sleep ends and waking begins. Her roommate's bed was already empty, neatly made. May had met Amara only briefly during move-in, a friendly violin student who kept odd hours and practiced somewhere else, thankfully. Their room was barely big enough for the two narrow beds, desks, and shared dresser, with no space for instruments. May checked her phone and was startled to find several notification icons. She rarely got messages from anyone except her father, who preferred calling to texting anyway. Tapping the screen, she found friend requests from Zoe, Thomas, and Lily, along with a message from Zoe inviting her to lunch. Even stranger was an email from the conservatory's administration office, requesting that she come in before her first class. Me stared at it, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Had something gone wrong with her scholarship? Had Professor Harlow complained about her disrupting his class? She dressed quickly in simple jeans and a sweater, another reminder of how different she was from many of the other students with their expensive, fashionable clothes. After a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal made in the dorm's shared microwave, she headed across campus, autumn leaves crunching under her feet. The administration building was quieter than she expected. A receptionist directed her to a small conference room where, to her surprise, she found Dr. Wei waiting alongside Professor Harlow and Professor Kwan. Good morning. Ms. Lin, Dr. Wei said, gesturing for her to sit. Thank you for coming in so early. We won't keep you long. May perched on the edge of a chair, trying to control her nervousness. Is something wrong? On the contrary, Professor Kwan said kindly. We wanted to discuss some adjustments to your program. Professor Harlow cleared his throat. After yesterday's demonstration, it's clear that your current class placement may not be optimal. His tone was professional, with none of the condescension from yesterday. You're currently registered for advanced piano performance, which covers technical fundamentals and interpretation at what we consider the advanced undergraduate level. But based on what we heard yesterday, Dr. Wei continued, we believe you would be better served in our artist development track, which is typically reserved for graduate students or exceptional undergraduates in their final year. May blinked, trying to process this information. You want to move me up? After just one class? Talent like yours requires appropriate challenges, Professor Kwan said. The artist development program is more individualized. You'd have weekly one-on-one instruction, plus master classes and chamber music opportunities. The focus is on refining artistry and preparing for a professional career. There would be additional requirements, Dr. Wei added. A solo recital at the end of each semester, competition preparation, and possibly some performance opportunities that arise throughout the year. May's head was spinning. This was moving much faster than she had anticipated. I don't know what to say. Professor Harlow leaned forward slightly. May I speak frankly, Ms. Lin? When she nodded, he continued. Yesterday I misjudged you. I made assumptions based on limited information, and for that I apologize. The words seemed to cost him some effort, but his gaze was direct. However, my error revealed something important. You have capabilities that would be wasted in a standard class progression. Richard rarely admits mistakes, Professor Kwan said with a small smile. So when he does, it's worth paying attention. We've also spoken with the scholarship committee, Dr. Wei added. Given these program changes, we're increasing your funding to cover additional expenses. Better practice room access, recording sessions, competition travel if needed, and so on. May felt overwhelmed. Just yesterday morning she had been a nobody, worried about fitting in at all. Now these important people were talking about her as if she were some kind of special investment. What about Volkov's teaching? She asked, finding her voice. He had very specific ideas about technique and interpretation. He wouldn't want me to abandon his methods. Professor Kwan nodded thoughtfully. Alexei always did have strong opinions. I would never ask you to discard what you've learned from him. In fact, I'd like to understand his approach better. Perhaps we could discuss his methods as part of your individual instruction. I'd be your primary advisor, he continued, but you'd also work with other faculty for specific repertoire or techniques. Professor Harlow, for instance, is our resident expert on Russian composers. Harlow nodded in confirmation. Rachmaninoff, in particular. The irony wasn't lost on May, but she could see that the professor was making a genuine effort to rebuild their relationship on more respectful terms. This is a lot to take in, May said honestly. Of course it is, Dr. Wei agreed, but exceptional circumstances call for exceptional responses. The conservatory exists to nurture talent. Ms. Lin, we would be failing in our mission if we didn't provide the right environment for someone with your gifts. Think about it today. Professor Kwan suggested. Come see me this afternoon if you have questions. But know that this opportunity is yours if you want it. When May left the meeting, her mind was buzzing with possibilities. She had 10 minutes before her music theory class, just enough time to call her father. He picked up on the second ring, his voice bringing an immediate sense of comfort. Baba, she said. Switching to Mandarin, you won't believe what just happened. As she explained, she could hear the pride and wonder in his voice. My little cricket, he said when she finished, using his childhood nickname for her. Volkov always said you would surprise them all. I'm scared, Baba, she admitted. What if I can't live up to their expectations? What if yesterday was just a lucky performance? You have never given less than your best, he said firmly. That's all anyone can ask. And remember what Volkov always told you. May smiled despite her anxiety. Fear is just energy you haven't directed yet. Exactly. Use it to fuel your work, not to hold yourself back. After promising to call again soon, May rushed to her theory class, only to find that news of her performance had spread there too. The professor, a young woman named Dr. Rossi, actually stopped mid-lecture when May walked in. Ah, Ms. Lin, she said with a smile. We were just discussing Rachmaninoff's harmonic innovations. Perhaps you'd like to share your insights on his third concerto? May felt her face grow hot as every head turned toward her. I'm still learning the theory behind it, she said honestly. I mostly understand it through my fingers, not intellectually. Rather than being dismissive, Dr. Rossi seemed intrigued. That's actually a fascinating distinction. The physical versus intellectual understanding of musical structure. She used this to launch into a discussion that, thankfully, took the spotlight off May by lunchtime. May was both exhausted and exhilarated. When she met Zoe, Thomas, and Lily at the campus cafe, they already knew about her program change. News travels fast, Zoe explained, sliding a coffee toward May. Plus, Thomas's roommate works in the practice room scheduling office, and he saw your name being moved to the priority list. The priority list? May asked. Extended hours, better pianos, sound isolation, Thomas explained. Basically, you've been moved to the VIP section. Lily leaned forward. So spill. How does it feel to become conservatory famous overnight? May stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Unreal. Yesterday I was worried about fitting in at all. Today I'm meeting with the dean and getting special treatment. It doesn't seem fair. Fair has nothing to do with it, Thomas said, pushing his glasses up. Music isn't fair. Some people practice their whole lives and never play like you do. It's not just natural talent, May protested. I worked incredibly hard with Volkov. Nobody's saying you didn't, Zoe assured her. But there's something special about how you play. Everyone felt it yesterday. A tall guy with dark curly hair approached their table, stopping beside Lily. Hey, he said to the group before focusing on May. You're May Lin, right? The new piano prodigy everyone's talking about? I'm not a prodigy, May said quickly. I'm 22. Prodigies can be any age, he countered with a charming smile. I'm Nick Delgado, Composition Department. There's a video going around of you playing Rach 3 yesterday. Impressive stuff. A video? May echoed, alarmed. Zoe grimaced. Yeah, probably should have mentioned that. Someone recorded your performance and it's kind of everywhere now, Nick nodded. Over 2,000 views on the conservatory's unofficial Instagram. People are calling you the Pine Ridge phenomenon. May felt slightly ill. Volkov had always kept her performances small and private, believing that premature exposure could damage a developing artist. I didn't agree to be recorded, she said quietly. Welcome to life at Eastern Met, Nick said with a shrug. Privacy is an illusion, but hey, at least you're famous for being amazing. Some people get known for epic failures. Seeing May's discomfort, Lily changed the subject. Nick, didn't you have that orchestration deadline today? Due at 3, he confirmed. Just taking a sanity break, actually. He turned back to May. I'm writing a piano concerto for my thesis. After seeing that video, I'd kill to have you look at the piano part. Give me some feedback, maybe? Before May could respond, her phone buzzed with a text. It was from Professor Kwan. When you've made your decision about the program change, please let me know. Also, the Dean of Performance wanted me to ask if you'd consider playing at the Benefactors Gala next month. Rachmaninoff, perhaps. He stared at her phone, then at the expectant faces around her. Her quiet, anonymous life had vanished in the space of 24 hours, replaced by something simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Opportunities were appearing from every direction, but so were expectations. I need to practice, she said suddenly, standing up. I'm sorry. I need to think. Her new friends looked concerned but understanding. Need company on the walk to the practice rooms? Zoe offered. May shook her head. I think I need a few minutes alone. As she hurried across campus, autumn leaves swirling around her feet, May felt as if she were walking between two worlds. Behind her was the simple life she had known. Her father's apartment, Volkov's dusty studio, the struggle to be taken seriously. Ahead lay something new and uncertain. Opportunity, yes, but also scrutiny, pressure, and expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. She found an empty practice room in the old building, not one of the fancy ones she'd apparently now have access to, but a familiar-feeling space with scuffed floors and a piano that had seen better days. She sat at the bench, not playing yet, just breathing. Fear is just energy you haven't directed yet, she whispered to herself, hearing Volkov's gruff voice in her memory. Then she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Not Rachmaninoff this time, but Bach. Clean, precise mathematical Bach, whose structured beauty had always helped her think clearly. As her fingers found the familiar patterns, May felt her mind gradually settling. Whatever came next, this was still the core of it all. Just her and the piano, the music flowing between them. Everything else was noise. And noise, as Volkov had taught her, could always be tuned out when necessary. 4 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. May's days took on a new rhythm. Intensive practice sessions, one-on-one lessons with Professor Kwan, theory classes, and occasional small gatherings with her growing circle of friends. The conservatory felt less intimidating now, though she still sometimes caught herself feeling like an outsider looking in. The morning of the Benefactors Gala dawned clear and crisp. May woke early, as had become her habit, and sat on the edge of her bed staring at the garment bag hanging on her closet door. Inside was a simple but elegant black dress, a gift from Zoe and Lily, who had insisted on taking her shopping when they learned she had nothing suitable for the evening's performance. It's an investment in your career, Zoe had declared when May protested the expense, even though they'd found it on sale. First impressions matter in this business. Now, as May made herself a cup of tea in the dorm kitchen, she tried to calm the butterflies in her stomach. Tonight she would play for the conservatory's most important supporters, wealthy donors, Arts Foundation representatives, and even a few industry professionals who might be looking for new talent to promote. Dr. Wei had made it clear that this was both an honor and an opportunity. She was midway through her morning practice session when her phone rang. Her father calling from Pine Ridge, just wanted to wish you luck before I head to work, he said. Though I know you don't need it. You're ready. I don't feel ready, May admitted, wiping rosin dust from her fingers. What if I mess up? These people give thousands of dollars to the school. Then they'll still have heard something special, even with mistakes, her father said with the simple wisdom that had guided her all her life. Remember what you told me about Volkov's favorite saying? May smiled despite her nerves. Perfection is for machines. Artists strive for truth. Exactly. Play truthfully and they will listen. After they hung up, May returned to the piano with renewed focus. She ran through the most challenging passages of Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto one more time. No longer struggling with the technical demands, but instead seeking something deeper, the emotional core that made this piece so beloved despite its difficulty. Professor Kwan found her there an hour later, so absorbed in her playing that she didn't hear him enter. Remarkable, he said when she finished a particularly complex section. You found something new in that passage. Something I haven't heard before, even from professionals who have played this piece for decades. May looked up, startled. I was just trying to feel what Rachmaninoff might have felt. All that longing for his homeland, but also the excitement of making a new life in America. Professor Kwan nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly it. Most pianists get so caught up in the technical fireworks that they forget this is essentially an immigrant story, full of nostalgia, hope, fear, and determination. He sat on a nearby chair. How are you feeling about tonight? Nervous, May admitted. There will be so many important people there. Important perhaps, but still just people who love music, he reminded her. And tonight you get to show them why they should continue supporting young artists like yourself. He paused. There's something else you should know. I've invited someone special to attend. May looked at him questioningly. Alexei Volkov. May's heart skipped a beat. But his health is stable enough for a short trip, according to his doctors. His nurse will accompany him, and we've arranged comfortable transportation. He'll only stay for your performance, then return home. Tears sprang to May's eyes before she could stop them. He's coming, really? Professor Kwan smiled. He was quite insistent once he heard about your success here. Apparently he called the dean himself, which I gather is the first time he's spoken to Eleanor in nearly 20 years. His speech is still affected by the stroke, but his determination is unchanged. May felt a complex mix of emotions, joy at seeing her mentor again, but also a fresh wave of anxiety. Volkov had always been her most demanding critic. Even after his stroke, his standards had never wavered. Thank you, she said finally. That means everything. The day passed quickly after that. Final rehearsals with the student orchestra, a brief rest in her dorm room, then preparations for the evening. Amara helped with her hair and Zoe came by to assist with makeup, something May rarely wore. Not too much, May protested as Zoe approached with an eyeliner pencil. I want to look like myself. Just enhanced, Zoe promised. Trust me. When they finished, May barely recognized the young woman in the mirror. The simple black dress accentuated her slender frame, making her look more sophisticated than she felt. The minimal makeup highlighted her dark eyes and gave her cheeks a subtle glow. You look like what you are, Amara said approvingly. A serious artist. The concert hall was transformed for the gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the space, and elegant floral arrangements adorned the stage. Conservatory staff in formal attire guided guests to their seats, while a string quartet played softly in the lobby. Backstage, May peered through a gap in the curtain, scanning the filling auditorium. Her eyes stopped on a wheelchair in a specially reserved space near the front. Even from a distance, she would know that profile anywhere. The strong nose, the bushy white eyebrows, the proud tilt of the head that even illness couldn't diminish. Volkov had come. Beside him sat a nurse in a simple uniform, and on his other side, to May's surprise, was her father. She hadn't known he would be here tonight. He must have driven hours after work to make it. The sight of the two most important men in her life sitting side by side waiting to hear her play brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Don't cry now," warned the concertmaster, a graduate student named David. "You'll ruin your makeup and have to play with raccoon eyes." May laughed, despite herself, blinking back the tears. "Thanks for the reminder." 5 minutes, everyone," called the stage manager, sending a fresh wave of butterflies through May's stomach. She closed her eyes and took several deep breaths, using the centering technique Volkov had taught her. Gradually, the noise and distractions fell away, leaving only a sense of readiness. When Dr. Wei finished her welcoming remarks and introduced, "Our remarkable new talent, Mei Lin," May walked onto the stage with steady steps, acknowledging the applause with a modest bow. Her eyes found Volkov and her father in the audience. Her father gave an encouraging nod, while Volkov's expression remained impassive, his performance face, as she used to call it. May took her place at the piano, adjusting the bench slightly. The conductor raised his baton, and the orchestra began the gentle opening theme of Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto. May breathed with the music, her hands poised, waiting for her entrance. When her moment came, she began to play. Not for the wealthy, donors or the faculty members or even for her own future, but for the music itself, for the young man who had composed this piece a century ago, carrying his heart's memories from one country to another, for her father, who had sacrificed so much to nurture her gift, for Volkov, who had believed in her potential when she was just a small-town girl playing other people's pianos. The first movement unfolded with both power and delicacy. When May reached the monumental cadenza, the extended solo section where the pianist demonstrates their virtuosity, she chose Rachmaninoff's own, more difficult version rather than the simplified one most pianists prefer. Her hands flew across the keyboard, finding not just the notes but the emotional truth behind them. From the corner of her eye, she could see Volkov leaning forward in his wheelchair, his gaze intense. She poured everything into her playing, all the years of secret practice, all the lessons learned, all the dreams deferred and now perhaps within reach. The first movement ended to enthusiastic applause, but May barely noticed. She was already in the world of the second movement, with its lyrical, sometimes melancholy character. Here, technique served emotion even more directly, requiring a singing tone that made the piano seem to breathe. By the time she reached the third movement, with its dance-like rhythms and final build to an exhilarating conclusion, May was no longer aware of the audience or even herself. She had become simply a conduit for the music, allowing it to flow through her fingers to reach the listeners. When the final chords resounded through the hall, there was a moment of complete silence, that rare, precious silence that follows only the most moving performances, when an audience needs a moment to return to reality before responding. Then came the applause, not polite and reserved as might be expected from such a formal gathering, but immediate and passionate. People rose to their feet, some wiping away tears, others smiling in wonder. Dr. Wei was beaming while Professor Harlow, who had watched with growing amazement, shook his head in disbelief before joining the standing ovation. May rose from the piano bench, momentarily dizzy from the intensity of the experience. She bowed deeply to the audience, then to the orchestra, then to the conductor. As she turned back to face the hall, her eyes sought Volkov. He was struggling to stand, refusing his nurse's attempts to keep him seated. With tremendous effort, he pulled himself upright, leaning heavily on a cane. When he was fully standing, the first time May had seen him on his feet since his stroke, he raised his free hand in a gesture she knew well. It was how he had always acknowledged his own students when they had finally, after countless attempts, played something exactly as he believed it should be played. Tears streamed freely down May's face now as she bowed again, this time directly to her teacher. In that moment, all the doubts, all the hardships, all the hours of practice until her fingers bled, everything was worth it. Later, after the reception, where donors lined up to meet her, after Professor Kwan introduced her to a recording executive who expressed serious interest in her future, after Dr. Wei announced an expansion of her scholarship to include international competition opportunities, May finally found a quiet moment with Volkov and her father. The old Russian's speech was slurred but understandable. "You played, as yourself," he said, each word a victory over his condition. "Not as me, not as anyone else. This is what I wanted." "I couldn't have done it without you," May said, holding his frail hand. "No," he agreed with a shadow of his old bluntness. "But now, you go beyond me. This is as it should be." Her father, who had listened quietly to their exchange, finally spoke. "I knew when you were 5 years old and begged to press the keys while I tuned. There was something special in how you listened, how you understood the sounds." His eyes shone with pride. "But I never imagined this." May looked from one man to the other, the father who had given her roots and the teacher who had given her wings. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly aware of standing at a crossroads. Volkov snorted, a familiar sound that reassured her some things never changed. "Now? Now you practice. Tomorrow and next day and always. The rest will come." Her father nodded agreement. "One note at a time, little cricket, just like always." As they spoke, May noticed Professor Kwan approaching with the recording executive, both wearing expressions that suggested important conversations ahead. Beyond them, she could see her new friends waiting patiently, clearly planning some kind of celebration. The future stretched before her, full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. But in this moment, surrounded by those who had believed in her when she hardly believed in herself, May finally understood that she belonged, not just at the conservatory or on the concert stage, but to the endless, beautiful conversation between artists and audiences that had been ongoing for centuries. She had found her voice in that conversation. And now, note by note, performance by performance, she would continue to add her unique perspective to the great symphony of human expression that binds us all together across time, language, and circumstance.